Hello, Mike. How are you doing today?
There we go. I'm good. Thank you.
Okay, so I'll just give a brief introduction about you and then you are good to start.
Great.
Okay, so hello and welcome to Good Firms Information and Technology Virtual Expo GFiT 2020, a premier event hosted by Good Firms. As you all know, Good Firms is a review and rating platform for leading services and product companies in the IT space. And as we start, I'd like to call upon Mike Allton. He is a brand evangelist, author, speaker at Agora Pulse, and he'll speak on creating the ultimate brand ambassador program to build brand visibility. And I must say, Mike, that's a pretty interesting topic because brand visibility, brand awareness are these things even interest me. So I think our participants will surely benefit a lot from your session of today. So for cause I don't want to cause any further delay, so you can take it up from there.
Fantastic. Thank you, Sharon. Thank you, Rachel, and the entire event. And thank you, everyone, for watching. I'm going to do a little screen sharing wizardry here. And now we're ready to begin. So I have prepared some information for you on how I've built a successful influencer marketing program and what that even means. So make sure you click on speaker view and have your screens large so that my slides are full screen for you. And to save time throughout the presentation, I'm going to assume that some of you may already be working with businesses, starting your own businesses, or will soon someday do all the above. And therefore, you need to learn about working with influencers and creating your own influencer marketing program from that perspective. I'm going to start with a story, and then I'm going to spend some time sharing what I do and how I do it, and we'll have plenty of time at the end for questions. In 1903, decades before computers and before even typewriters, the preferred method of communication was the fountain pen. The predecessor to today's ballpoint pens, the fountain pen was elegant, it was beautiful, and it was prone to extreme messiness. Those who partook in extended use of such instruments were clearly and literally marked. And it was in that year that the Conklin Pen Company in Toledo, Ohio, decided to employ influencer marketing, though of course it wasn't called that back then. Influencer marketing is a relatively recent term. Throughout the 20th century, businesses and marketing agencies turned to celebrities for endorsements and to serve as spokespeople for brands. In the very early 1900s, most celebrity influencers were athletes, and by mid-century, movie stars had moved onto the scene. But Conklin knew better than to use just any old celebrity to work with. In order to sell fountain pens to everyday folks, they needed an influencer that everyday folks would relate to, and whom it would make sense to tie to the brand. Imagine for a moment if Conklin had hired Major League Baseball slugger Babe Ruth as their spokesman. Other than signing fat contracts, Babe wasn't exactly known for his prolific use of the quiet quill. While fans of the Sultan of Swat might have taken an interest in Conklin's offerings, few others would have paid it any mind. That's the first concept and criteria when it comes to considering influencer marketing for your own business: brand fit. But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let's review some preliminary concepts. Put simply, influencer marketing is when a brand leverages someone who has an audience of their own to exert some influence over that audience. That might be a recommendation to purchase a product, of course, or it might be just using the influencer to introduce a brand or business to their audience, which means it's important to recognize that anyone with an audience is an influencer. Influence is not limited to celebrities with millions of social media followers. A well-respected member of your community is also an influencer, and it might be argued a more powerful one for the right brand. We therefore break potential influencers down into a number of categories, depending largely on the size of their audience. Influencers at the mega influencer level typically sport over 1 million followers and are usually famous celebrities outside of social media. Just like the endorsers of the early 1900s, you can expect to see mostly professional athletes and movie stars in this category. Expect to use influencers of this magnitude to generate broad brand awareness and interest over a wide swath of demographics. But you'll pay dearly for that exposure. Now, down a tier, we find influencers who typically boast between 100,000 to 1 million followers. Now, you'll certainly find your share of celebrities at this level, but you'll also see a great many influencers who have built their influence on social media itself. This will include bloggers, vloggers, and other internet personalities. And it's at this level that we expect to see a far greater degree of specialization or focused interest, such as travel or food, making it a bit easier to find influencers at this level that align with a particular brand. Now, even more focused is the micro influencer with their 1,000 to about 100,000 followers. Of course, someone with nearly 100,000 social media fans could be said to have a great deal of influence, particularly if they've stayed focused on a specific niche. It's at this level that brands who are not focused on specific geography, i.e. the Gold Coast suburb of Chicago, can find highly effective and extremely affordable influencers to work with. The challenge when you start to get to influencers in these similar categories, these smaller categories, is identifying and working with them. Everyone knows who the mega celebrities are, and those celebrities have experienced staff to handle campaign requests. Joe the vlogger may have never worked with a brand before, so be prepared for that. Finally, we've got that smallest tier at under 1,000 followers. This is typically where you'll find local influencers who are prominent members of their community. They may even be folks who have limited knowledge and use of social media. Yet, for the right business, a local influencer may be the absolute best influencer to work with and drive actual business results. Okay, now that I've overwhelmed you with numbers, maybe it's time to introduce myself. I'm Mike Allton, and I am honored and privileged to serve as the brand evangelist for Agorapulse, the top-rated social media management tool. And it's there that I leverage my years of experience working with influencers and experts in the social media space to run our ambassador program, as well as manage all of our event sponsorships and brand partnerships. I've also published Ultimate Guide to Social Media Marketing with Entrepreneur Press, which is co-authored with Eric Buteau, Jen Herman, Stephanie Liu, and Amanda Robinson, which is why I'm here with you today. I'm going to be sharing my experience from both sides of the equation, because you see, before I became the brand evangelist for Agorapulse, I was an ambassador myself. So throughout today's session, I'm going to be drawing on my experience and my observations of other brands and influencer marketing campaigns to help you understand why you might want to work with influencers in the first place, and then work our way through an ideal brand ambassador program. I'll show you how to identify influencers and foster relationships, how to leverage them once they become ambassadors, and how to measure the success of your efforts. So if you haven't already, silence that phone, disable all those notifications, and shut down at least half of your tabs, because you're going to want to pay close attention to this conversation. Ready? Let's dive back in. So, while I'd love to assume that the entire reason you're watching this presentation is because you've already been sold on the idea of leveraging influencers and influencer marketing for your business, and that you just want to go about it the right way, but maybe that's not you. Maybe you've seen some of the horror stories in the news of influencers acting like divas or padding their stats with fake followers, and you think, maybe that's not for me. Maybe old school sales is the way to go. Except your customers today, they're not as interested in talking to salespeople, but they do listen to influencers. And as a business, that takes time to identify, nurture, and utilize influencers. You can expect to reach new audiences, scale content creation, and establish more trust with your audience. And ultimately, it's that trust which will determine whether they buy from you or from someone else. If you want to be top of mind and tip of tongue, influencer marketing is an exceptionally effective means to that end. But this is supposed to be a session on brand ambassador programs, right? What's the difference between an influencer and a brand ambassador? Simply put, a brand ambassador is an influencer who goes beyond paid influencer marketing campaigns. They're an avid fan and user of your product or services, and there's a real relationship and partnership in place. The kind of person Ken Blanchard might call a raving fan. A brand ambassador is not someone that you would pay once for a marketing campaign. There's an ongoing level of activity there, which is why you need a formal program in place to manage that. So now we get into the meat, what we're going to talk about today, how to actually build an ambassador program. And before I get into it, I should point out that everything I'm going to outline for you could be managed by a CMO or a social media manager as part of their day-to-day activities. You don't necessarily need to hire a full-time ambassador program manager. You will, however, need to invest a little more time up front getting things started. First, let's make sure that you and everyone else in your organization is on the same page in terms of goals and expectations. From brand awareness to sales, there's a lot that influencers can do for us, but they're not miracle workers. Think back for a moment to those different tiers of influencers. You can't expect a nano influencer with under 1,000 followers to tweet once and generate 5,000 sales. We'll be talking in a moment about how to identify influencers, and as part of that process, you will take a close look at each particular influencer's audience size and engagement levels. As you work more with them and potentially enter into partnership agreements, you can also talk with them about past projects and performance and create a very reasonable set of expectations for yourself. So how do you find influencers that are going to be a great fit and potentially join your ambassador program? Just as a Major League Baseball player probably makes for a lousy fountain pen spokesman, so too will most influencers be a poor match for you and your brand. You need to consider brand fit as the first criteria before proceeding with any individual influencer. So what does that mean exactly? Well, brand fit is the degree to which a particular influencer's voice, style, audience, and content focus align with that of the representing brands. In other words, how alike are the brand and the influencer? It helps if you've already thought about your own brand in terms of style, voice, message, and so on. Taking the time to craft a highly polished style guide that considers both aesthetics, fonts, colors, logo treatment, and tone, style, voice, culture, message, will make determination of brand fit easier. The second criteria you need to consider is the category of influencer you want to work with, such as mega influencer, and your available budget. With that in mind, it's time to start looking for influencers. There are a few different approaches you can take. One option is to just start with the people who are already talking about your brand. These may be customers, bloggers, or other influencers in your industry. The benefits here are many. They're already fans of your brand. They may have existing content to amplify. And they have a track record that you can actually evaluate. Now, while it's likely these existing fans have smaller audiences, they're probably in the micro or even nano influencer category. That also means they're probably more affordable. Another option is to consider the biggest names in your industry. This will likely be macro influencers with established audiences, people who are speaking at industry events and creating content in and about your industry. The reason for considering starting with known macro influencers is that these individuals will be top of mind. You won't have to spend a lot of time researching potential influencers to come up with this list. You're probably already following them on social networks like Twitter. But of course, that suggests a third approach. And this is likely what you'll need to do at some point regardless. Research. Researching influencers can take some time, but can also be extremely rewarding. It's quite likely that you will find some highly influential people who are a great fit for your brand, whom you never previously heard of. So where do you start? Well, BuzzSumo is a great option, though you can certainly search Google or on other specific social platforms directly. When you use BuzzSumo, you can search for influencers on Twitter or Facebook, as well as authors who have published content publicly. You can filter your results by time period, country, or language, and see who has some of the most prolific authors for your topic and see how they are in ranked order. Next, you can drill down to see exactly what they've published and where, and check out whether it's really the kind of content where it might have made sense to incorporate your own brand or products. If so, you found a potential influencer. We'll get into the specifics of what to do with that individual in a moment, but let's first finish considering how you can find more potential all-stars. As you find specific individuals, I recommend noting them in a Google Sheet or perhaps a tool like Nimble, which will give you easy access to your growing list of contacts, as well as help you learn more about that influencer. With a few clicks, Nimble can scour the web to find out all their social profiles, their websites, their contact information, and more. BuzzSumo gives you their Twitter profile, which you can click on and then import into Nimble using the Nimble Chrome extension, and just tag them as an influencer and return your research. If your industry and potential influencers are more likely to be found on YouTube or Instagram, again, you can search the native platforms, or you can use a tool like keywordtool.io, which will help you not only search, but filter and sort the results to give you really meaningful information and potential influencers. Once you begin reaching out to work with specific influencers, you can ask them to qualify and supplement the research you did. They can confirm social followers as well as website traffic and email subscribers. More importantly, if they've worked with other brands in the past, they can share metrics and case studies for the projects they've completed. It's worth repeating at this point that influencer marketing, it's all about relationships. You'll hear me use that word over and over again. While it's possible to be transactional with an influencer and, for instance, fill out a form and pay them to send a tweet, that's not effective. Truly effective influencer marketing happens when there's a relationship there. The influencer genuinely likes and appreciates the brand and is eager to work with you, and you're eager to work with and support them. But the thing is, relationships take time. I don't want to say there are no shortcuts to building a great relationship, because I'm about to share a bunch with you, but none of it matters unless you're able to successfully build rapport with each individual one at a time. I'm stressing this now because you may start doing some research on potential influencers, find a couple, and want to rush into the courtship phase rather than going back and looking for more. But as the adage says, don't put all your eggs in one basket. Take the time initially to build a great list of potential influencers and then begin to foster relationships with all of them. Some will be open to it, some won't. Some influencers will be excited to know and work with you. Others will take even more time. And the problem with any relationship is that you don't know in advance how it's going to go. These are essentially blind dates. Someone you reach out to today is going to be the most amazing ambassador for you tomorrow, but trust me on this, you won't know who at first. So build a list of 25 to 50 potential influencers if you can, and then get to work sparking those relationships. Did I mention relationships take time? I did? Cool. Okay. But the good news is, if you're deliberate about how you proceed, the odds of creating a successful, beneficial, positive relationship in a shorter amount of time increases dramatically. But first, a few don'ts. Don't stalk people, especially online influencers. Don't spam, and definitely do not add them to email lists without their explicit permission. Do not have set expectations or demands, and do not rush. Okay, now that that's out of the way, let's focus on what you can and should do. Start by following them on their preferred social network. Simply glance through their various social profiles and make a determination on which one they're most active and engaged. Note that depending on the network, some follows are one way and some must be mutually accepted, which means one of you has to initiate the connection and the other must approve it. For expediency, we'll differentiate those with follow versus connect. We want to make these clear because initially, if the influencer doesn't know you, they're not going to be inclined to connect with you. It's far easier to simply follow them on Twitter or Instagram if that's an option. If their preferred or only social network is one where a connection is required, it may be possible to follow their public posts depending on the network and if they've allowed it, or simply bookmark their profile and visit it regularly to see what they've posted recently. For nano influencers who may not be active on social media, consider which local organizations they may be involved in, such as Lions Club or a Chamber of Commerce. You may also want to look for a mutual acquaintance who might introduce you. And I see some of your fantastic questions coming in, and I will absolutely go through all of those at the end. Now, once you've identified and connected with or followed key influencers, it's time to start engaging with them. With most social networks, you can like or react to posts, you can share them, or you can comment on them. You'll need to use your best judgment to determine how to engage with each individual post that you see, but here are some helpful guidelines. Number one, engage with no more than one post per day on average. You don't want to be seen as liking 20 of my most recent posts, because then I'm going to think something's a little fishy. Number two, shares are the most meaningful engagement. You're saying you trust this person and their content enough to show it to your own audience. Number three, comments are where you have an opportunity to open dialogues and have conversations that can demonstrate similarities in thought between you and the influencer. That's how you develop rapport. Number four, likes and similar reactions are nice for staying top of mind, but not very meaningful. You may like, comment on, and share a single post from an influencer, but be wary of doing that too often or of liking every single post that they publish, like I mentioned. Some might perceive you as a raving fan, while others might just think you're raving. So instead, we recommend a daily regimen whereby you spend just 30 to 60 minutes checking in on the activity of your target influencers and engaging where it makes sense to do so in as natural a way as possible. And this is another area where Nimble can be incredibly powerful. As you identify influencers, as we talked about earlier, and begin to import them into Nimble, you can tag them. Much like a traditional sales funnel, you can use tags to signify the stage of your relationship with a particular influencer. Let's say you have a tag for new, for influencers that you're just starting to connect with and get to know. Within Nimble's contacts area, you can save a custom search for only contacts labeled new, and then slowly scroll through those contacts. For each one, you can see your past engagement, other pertinent info about that influencer, and click through to any of their social profiles to see if they've posted recently. While you can create other mechanisms like Twitter lists to follow multiple people and see only their posts, such devices are easily overwhelmed by prolific posters. Using Nimble to quickly jump to each influencer's social profiles will save you time, and it's a process you can easily stop to handle another business task and then pick back up again later. It's at this stage that you're building rapport with each influencer, but also observing how they meet the third criteria, audience engagement. It's quite possible for someone to have a large social media following and yet exert very little influence. Followers might have been purchased. Or the influencer may have had an engaged audience at one time, but now, due to a variety of reasons, they're not listening. As you're personally engaging with that influencer's posts and content, take note of how much other engagement that activity gets. Are you the only one commenting? Is it the same people commenting each and every time? Or do you note a nice variety of people engaging with the influencer and a decent number of people being reached? And in turn, how does the influencer respond to comments? Do they ignore you and everyone else? Or do they take the time to respond to every comment and keep their audience engaged? What's the tone and the style of those responses? If they were replying to a comment as you or your brand, how comfortable would you be? If you're observant, you'll pick up on their perspectives when it comes to business and your industry and other aspects of life that are important to both you and your audience. You'll come to understand their worldview, and that'll help you relate to that individual. You can take notes and use your intuition here as to whether a particular influencer is a good fit for your brand and marketing program or not, and you'll usually be spot on. You can also go the more formal route of creating a spreadsheet and scoring system for each influencer you observe. If you're reporting to a CMO or department head, this would be a good way to document and establish the value of your efforts. After you've spent time engaging with key influencers and they've responded positively, the time will come for you to reach out and propose a new level to your relationship: collaboration. At Agorapulse, where I'm the brand evangelist, my approach is to gift social media influencers a free lifetime account with the social media management tool and see if they like using it. I can see whether they're logging into the app or they're talking about Agorapulse online, and will further deepen the relationship by amplifying their content, sending them swag, and inviting influencers to participate in marketing activities like roundups or webinars where everyone benefits. Rob Balsabas of Thinkific had a very similar approach that's also extremely successful. He's happy to give prominent influencers free access to Thinkific's course platform, as well as ship them now famous Thinkific hoodies to sport on social media. When Rob or I want to do a live show and we need a guest, or we want to run a virtual summit of webinars, we have no shortage of talented experts and influencers to tap. In fact, Rob believes so strongly in the power of collaboration that he created a Facebook group just for collaborators in the marketing space to meet and ideate. If possible and appropriate, this is an excellent first step toward working with influencers, as there's mutual benefit and typically little to no cost to the brand. For example, suppose you want to create a piece of content around a topic that's relevant to your brand and industry, answering a question that many of your target prospects are struggling with. While you could write the entire post from your own perspective, you could instead reach out to 20 to 30 influencers in your space and invite them to answer the question and be published as a roundup. Roundup posts share varying perspectives and opinions. Roundup posts with 20 plus participants will be epic in length. And roundup posts with 20 plus participants will be shared a ton. You see, when you publish a roundup post, your job is to make your influencers look amazing. Take the time to create nice graphics and influencer cards that sport their name and headshot and Twitter handle. Once published, they'll make sure that you have your content amplified, and they'll help you get your blog in front of their audiences. That's a win-win. The next level will be some sort of paid campaign. Now, what that campaign looks like, and of course what the compensation is, will vary a great deal. While you might be tempted to fork out large sums of cash to get a mega influencer to mention you on a tweet, you might consider looking for a longer lasting activity around which to build campaigns. For instance, shoot a testimonial video, write a blog post, participate in a Facebook Live interview, publish a review, or maybe talk about your brand in their newsletter. Generally, we recommend making a note of what each influencer tends to do and then come up with an idea for a campaign format that fits that approach. If, for instance, they excel at Instagram, perhaps a series of related posts or stories that will educate their audiences on your brand, but in a fun and interesting way. The trick here is to come up with a campaign that accomplishes as many of the following benefits as possible. It's got to be long enough to ensure brand exposure to a wide audience, but short enough to limit investment and initial risk. It needs to educate audiences about your brand and your products, but also entertain audiences to keep them engaged. And ultimately should result in assets which can be reused or repurposed. Let's say you want a micro influencer to talk about your brand on social media and introduce you to the network. Rather than a single tweet or post, you might come up with a specific topic that is important to that influencer and relevant to your brand, and devise a series of posts and activities centered on that topic. That might include shares of relevant articles, yours or other people's, mentions of your brand, of course, and products, use of some engaging articles, determination of key hashtags, and perhaps a live video to culminate the campaign. At the end of that campaign, you'll have reached a sizable portion of their audience, driven traffic to your web properties, gained new social media followers, and created a piece of video content that you can use elsewhere and repurpose in any number of ways. Now, let me pull back the curtain for a moment and share with you details of how we use ambassadors at Agorapulse. Specifically, I'm going to share a brief look at a technique we've employed again and again and the results that we've accrued. So every quarter, I put on a virtual summit, just like the one you're attending today. They're packed with dozens of sessions from incredible marketing experts, many of the same presenters you might even be seeing here. And each summit garners thousands of registrants. The first point here is that when I put on a virtual summit, my ambassadors are the first ones to volunteer their expertise and audience. We'll agree on a topic, and I'll set up the platform. They'll deliver the content, and we both promote the event to our audiences, which is the second point. When I involve many different influencers in an online event, they'll all help promote and talk about it. They amplify my content and brand simultaneously. This past quarter summit generated over 4,000 registrants, which in turn resulted in hundreds and hundreds of new Agorapulse users, as well as countless social media mentions and engagement. That's a winning approach that we're refining and reproducing multiple times a year. And when it comes to compensation for influencers, brands have a lot of options and room to be creative. While a mega influencer is going to require a contract and significant payout, everyone else is going to prove to be a lot more affordable, starting with free. Many influencers will be happy to work with you in exchange for free products or services or access, co-marketing, and collaboration. In fact, many retail brands are able to collaborate with micro and nano influencers by simply offering a discount on products. The trick here is to balance generosity with practicality. Come up with a variety of ways that you can work with and help influencers, and then weigh what you're prepared to offer against what you're expected to receive in return. So options include free product or services or access, upgraded services or access, corporate swag or gifts, behind the scenes or direct access to point people. Don't discount that. People like that. Affiliate commissions, increased affiliate commissions, one-time payments, or even ongoing payments. Make sure that however you approach your influencer marketing and the specific influencers, that you set aside time monthly or quarterly to review the program and your measurables. Don't just assume it's working. And it's helpful to have that discussion with individual influencers as well. Is there anything else you can do for them, which might make them even more vocal in their support of your brand? Now, while the creation of campaigns can be a lot of fun, don't overlook the importance of being organized and thorough in how you run your initiatives in your brand ambassador program. You might not want or think you need to use contracts with your influencers, but too bad. You must have your relationship in writing once money starts to change hands. It's far better to communicate up front how the business aspects of the relationship are going to work to avoid potential friction in the future that might jeopardize the entire relationship. That said, you may choose not to use extensive contracts filled with legal language, particularly when dealing with micro and nano influencers. In most instances, it will be sufficient to document what the influencer will receive and what your brand will receive in exchange. The more experienced an influencer is with working with brands, the more comfortable he or she will be with formal contracts. It's best to broach the subject early on and have a simple conversation about the need to clearly document the project for both parties. For specific campaigns, clearly document all agreed upon expectations. This will typically include activity, time frame, frequency, assets needed or to be created, and any specific performance metrics. That might look like X social posts over X weeks to Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, utilizing images and copy provided by the influencer as an example. Once everyone agrees on the nature and the scope of the campaign, it's time to manage this as a project. It's usually best to use a project management tool like Asana here, because you can create campaign templates for yourself and duplicate for each project and influencer as needed. However, something as simple as a Google Doc can work too. The key is to make sure everything is considered and communicated in advance. Other people need to be involved and have tasks to do. Make sure they understand what's needed and by when, so that everything can be delivered on time. When it comes to dealing with online influencers, prompt and full payment is essential. The last thing you want is to have an upset influencer with 100,000 social media fans suddenly ruining all your hard work with a series of complaining tweets. I mean, of course, you want to get what you paid for. An influencer agreed to do a campaign and didn't deliver, they shouldn't be paid. But do not withhold payment just because the results maybe weren't what you hoped for, or perhaps some deliverable wasn't on time. It's far better to be generous and magnanimous at this stage. And recognize the truth of influencer marketing, which is that it really boils down to working to improve brand awareness, and that cannot simply be measured. Any activity on the part of influencers is going to be valuable and long-lasting. But that leads us into the final topic we need to consider when it comes to influencer marketing: success. Earlier, we talked about how the Conklin Pen Company wanted to connect with a contemporary influencer to espouse the use of their fountain pens. Well, who do you think they might have gone with in 1903? Someone who fits all the criteria we talked about above? None other than Mark Twain. Twain was the author back then of The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, Life on the Mississippi, and A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court. He was also extremely well known throughout the country as someone who penned their thoughts regularly. Clearly, Twain could easily be seen using and enjoying something like a fountain pen, and so he was paid to endorse the Conklin Crescent pen. It was quoted as saying, "I prefer it to 10 other fountain pens because it carries its filler in its own stomach, and I cannot mislay it, even by art or intention. Also, I prefer it because it is a profanity saver. It cannot roll off the desk." His quotes and endorsements not only contributed to greater awareness of Conklin pens and doubtless more sales, but represented assets the company was able to repurpose for over a century. To this day, you can buy a Conklin fountain pen with Mark Twain's signature and endorsement. So that engagement of an influencer was clearly a success for Conklin, no matter the cost. What about you? How do you determine if your influencer marketing is successful? Because of the density of icebergs, it's not uncommon for large slabs of ice to float through the ocean with just a small portion visible above the water. All you can see is the tip, even though the entire iceberg may be huge. Measuring influencer marketing is exactly the same. There are some things you can measure, such as reach, how many people saw a particular post, clicks, traffic sent from a post to linked assets, leads and sales. What you won't be able to measure is the number of people who were introduced to your brand or products by an influencer and decide to purchase days or even weeks later. You also won't be able to measure how people's perceptions change, hopefully positively, as a result of the information and association with that influencer. Simply put, this is brand awareness. The more people know about and talk about your brand, the more likely they will be to think of or consider your brand when the need arises. It's impossible to measure accurately, but when executed well, your business should see improvements to the most important metric of all, your bottom line. Thank you. I appreciate your time. We're going to jump over to the questions now. Rachel, Sharon, if you need anything from me while I get into that, just let me know. Otherwise, I'll pop over here. I see a question. Let me change my screen now. From Ron. Ron asks, isn't influencer marketing losing its momentum? I mean, there are so many influencers out there, but a very few being authentic. Also, the audience today is wise enough to sense the monetary motives. What's the future of influencer marketing? Love this, Ron. This definitely plays off of some of the things that I've talked about throughout their presentation. And I definitely see a difference between the kind of paid influencers you're talking about and the kind of relationship building that I do. You might consider the most common mainstream influencers as not influencers at all, but sponsorships, right? They were paid to post to Instagram. They were paid to do a tweet. They were paid to go to Fire Island to reference one of the big disasters that have happened in influencer marketing. But the reality is that influencer marketing is not new and it is not going away. We're talking about it actually more. And the proper way to do influencer marketing continues to grow in popularity and effectiveness. Thanks in part to, frankly, me doing talks like this and other people whose shoulders I'm standing on, doing the good work of teaching brands how to do influencer marketing correctly, which is to have that authentic relationship. At Agorapulse, one of the most exciting things that I see from my position as brand evangelist is when my ambassadors see in one of the many different Facebook groups out there, someone would post a question: what social media marketing tool do you all use? What social media management tool should I use? And I don't have to say anything. I don't have to ask. I don't have to comment. But my ambassadors naturally and authentically pile on, oh, you've got to use Agorapulse. It's fantastic. And then they go on to share why. And they talk about how they use that tool every day. I'm not technically paying them to say that. We do have a monetary relationship, but I'm paying them to do other things. And that's very clearly, spelled out. I'm paying them to create videos or do webinars or write blog posts. I've never asked them to respond, to comment, but they do. So I think that's how you can show and demonstrate that influencer marketing is still very valid today. So someone asked, how is an influencer different from a brand ambassador? We did touch on that briefly, but just to clarify, an influencer is anybody. That's a very broad definition. Anybody that has an audience, right? Whereas a brand ambassador, to me, is someone that you've developed a relationship with. They have a working relationship with your brand, whether that's they use their product, your products, or they use your services, and they can talk about it in a very authentic way. We used to have an affiliate program at Agorapulse that, frankly, anybody could sign up for, which is not uncommon in affiliate marketing. You'd sign up to be an Agorapulse affiliate, and then you get a tracking link, and you could include that tracking link in content and get commissions on sales. And I killed it off this year because we found that we weren't attracting authentic influencers. There were people throwing the link out there and talking about Agorapulse, and they'd never used it. And that's not really what I'm looking for. So we totally killed that. And I think that's a big difference between influencer and brand ambassador. Jazz asks, can audience identify credible and engageable influencers? How? Well, if I'm understanding you correctly, you're asking if you can look at an audience of an influencer and see if they're credible. There's a couple of nuances to this question. The one way to be looking at it is like, is that person's audience legitimate, right? Or have they just bought a bunch of fake followers? And I couldn't tell you what the tool to use is, but I know there are tools out there specifically for Twitter where you can plug in someone's handle and you can see the percentage of their audience that has been purchased, that is quote unquote fake. That may be something you want to use, particularly if you have doubts about an individual influencer, maybe a lot of influencers in your space. I know if I was specifically looking at a lot of Twitter influencers in the social media marketing space, that might be a concern. So you could run their profile through there and get a sense for the veracity of their audience. But the other perspective that I don't know if you're asking or not, but the other perspective I might take with this question is using an individual influencer's audience to gauge just how much influence that influencer has. I'm using the word influence a lot. In other words, you would have to look at their posts. This is kind of what we talked about before. You would look at each time that influencer posts and look at how many people comment and respond and what that discussion is like. Are there real conversations? Does it seem like the influencer is successfully teaching or persuading that audience about whatever it is that they're talking about? Or does it seem like they're posting and nothing is happening? Now, it's possible that I could share a link to a blog post and drive a lot of traffic to that blog post and not get a lot of engagement on that social post. Totally possible. So this is just one of many things that you would want to look at. But I would take that into consideration. If they're just posting and posting and posting and they're not getting a lot of comments or not getting a lot of real interesting conversation discussion, if it just doesn't feel like they're exerting real influence, definitely question that. And you'll know what that looks like when you get into it. Another person asks, which KPI should be tracked for one's campaign? Great question. This is, as I mentioned at the end there, one of the real challenges with influencer marketing. I know you asked that question kind of before we even got to it, which is fine. But one of the things that you can do that I didn't really get into is create dedicated landing pages for your influencers. This may or may not make sense for your business. It makes perfect sense for mine. So this is what I do. I use a tool called First Promoter to track referrals, subscriptions, and trials. In other words, you create an account within First Promoter that I've set up within a campaign I've created, and you get a unique tracking link. And when you share that link, someone clicks on it, and if they decide to sign up for a trial of Agorapulse, little check mark goes past your account. And if they go so far as to purchase a subscription to Agorapulse, you get credited with that sale. That's traditional affiliate marketing, right? So we have an affiliate program. Technically, it's a partner program. It's by invitation only, because I did say I killed our affiliate program earlier. So we've got a partner program where I can track those referrals. And this is only for people who are creating content about social media that might be good ambassadors for me down the road. And then I have multiple levels in my ambassador program. The first level is they're basically affiliates, but they get increased commission. That's part of the benefit of being an ambassador for Agorapulse. Now I've got other levels of my ambassador program where I don't pay them affiliate commissions anymore. Now I pay them a monthly stipend, and they're on contracts and so on. So to answer your question, if you can do that, if you can have a system for tracking referrals, and if you can even connect it to a landing page so that all the traffic to that landing page can be attributed to that specific influencer, now you have a perfect way to at least track that tip of the iceberg that we talked about at the end there, right? I know when one of my ambassadors has sent traffic to my site. I know when they've generated subscribers, and I know when those subscribers are paying me now on a monthly basis. So I can then at the end of the month demonstrate how much traffic, how many trials, and how many subscribers my entire ambassador campaign has generated. We know that there's more out there, and everybody in my organization is on the same page. We all get it, that the brand awareness of Agorapulse is so much broader and greater now, 18 months, 2 years later, than what it was when we first started this ambassador program. But we also have some measurables that we can take to a board or anybody that asks and say, hey, we're at least accomplishing this. So Derek asks, what percentage of influencer marketing should cover your overall digital marketing strategy? Oh, that's a great question, Derek. I would lean towards, I'll say, a greater percentage than most of the other things you're doing, because there's so much lasting value to it, but it will take time to get there, right? So if you're like starting from day one today, you are literally a startup. You have no digital marketing in place and you're beginning it all. Here's where you're probably going to want to invest more in like paid advertising and really lean into content creation. But as you begin to establish a nice archive of content, as you begin to have established some brand awareness and you've established yourself in the industry as a brand, it will be easier for you to develop those relationships with influencers. And that can start to create or take up a larger part of the pie, so to speak, where, you know, at Agorapulse, we're now leaning very heavily into influencers, and we're using them for our events, and we're allowing that to build even greater kinds of strategies that we might not have even considered 2 years ago. Someone asked, micro or macro influencers, who has the greatest impact? This depends on your business. So Agorapulse, for me, we're a global brand, right? We're actually based out of France. So the United States, North America, and the EU are our largest markets, but anybody in the world can use Agorapulse. We're available in English, French, and Portuguese or Spanish. So for us to use a micro or even a nano influencer in a specific region or geography, that wouldn't make sense. The return just wouldn't be there, and the influence wouldn't be there. It's unlikely that the president of a local Lions Club or Chamber of Commerce in, you know, Huron County, Ohio, is going to actually deliver a lot of leads for us. We're looking for people who are talking about social media. But if you are a local business, or if you are super hyper focused on a specific niche, that's where it might be very beneficial for you to focus on that smaller influencer. They're going to be more affordable, and they might actually be more effective. If you are, let me give you a really specific example. If you're a plumber in a specific city, you're only going to service a 10, 20, 50-mile radius, right? That's just the extent of your business. You're not going to go out of state for plumbing needs. You're a service, provider in a specific geography. That's where having those relationships and those partnerships and potentially influencer marketing in your area is very powerful. Way more powerful than working with some kind of macro or even mega influencer, on a global or national stage. They're not really going to do that much for your business. Oliver said, your take on brand fit is spot on. Thank you. Scenario 1, short-term decision maker choosing not the best brand fit for immediate gain that takes the shine off the brand in time, but a success for now. Scenario 2, decision maker with foresight choosing the best brand fit, giving low sales now, but eventual gain, success assured, but in time. How to sway the first decision maker's decision to go to the second choice to ensure the brand remains to stay with time. Yeah, so to recap what Oliver has said, you've got a couple different influencers that you could potentially choose from, and the decision maker in your organization is tasked with picking one, whether it's a one-off campaign with a bit of a mega or even a macro influencer that might give some short-term brand lift, but probably not long-term benefit, versus investing some time and some resources in a nano or a micro influencer that might give you more long-term benefit. And there's a couple different ways to approach this. The first way might be, well, what about both? I've done both. I've done short-term contracts with some of the mega influencers in the social media space, like Mari Smith and Jay Bear, and we've done 6-month contracts, and that's been fantastic. We also obviously invest heavily in long-term contracts and long-term growth. So if you can do both, that would be a great option to put on the table if you can swing that budget. The other thing you might do is look for a way to leverage the short-term contract, that short-term approach with an upper tier influencer. How can we leverage that? Like, if it's going to be to pay them to post to Instagram, could we negotiate that the post is a video and we're able to receive that asset after they've shared it? Because now you've got that video. I'll give you a silly example. Let's suppose you had budget and the decision maker was really enamored with using someone like Kim Kardashian, just a mega level celebrity. I know it's silly. No one's going to do that. But let's just suppose, hypothetically, that's the scenario. That's the choice here. If you could get Miss Kardashian to film a video spot that gets shared to her Instagram profile, but you get that video spot in return, and you're able to then at least share it to your channels and use it in advertising and other kinds of things. Now you're able to leverage that short-term investment, that one-time investment, into some long-term gains. Totally done that at Agora Pulse. I've shot brief testimonial videos with influencers. I mentioned Jay Bear, perfect example. One of the things that we did with Jay Bear was we had him film for us one of what he used to call webinars. I don't think he does it anymore, but these were like 9-minute webinars where he just quickly shared with you some brief information on a very specific topic. And when he did it for us, it was on a topic that very much related to our brand. It was very relevant to our audience. He filmed it, he shared it his channels, but he gave me the asset. So I have that webinar, and we've used it a couple times since. We've been able to leverage that asset on and on and on. If you can't do any of those things, then I would definitely double down and argue as strenuously as you could about the need to invest in the long-term growth of the company. That's how I would approach it. Someone asked, and we have a couple more minutes. I'll get through as many of these as I can. Someone asked, build the brand or driving sales? What's more important in influencer marketing? Ooh, yeah, that's a good question. Again, my favorite answer is both, if you can. But I would say build the brand. That's where I would lean if I had to choose, because by building the brand, you're going to make sales easier. You are literally going to make it an easier job on your sales team. Ask my sales team at Agorapulse. They will swear up and down that it's so much easier today to sell Agorapulse than it was 2, 3, 4 years ago. Because 4 years ago, in the social media marketing space, nobody knew who Agorapulse was. Nobody ever heard of Agorapulse. Now, our phones are ringing, not literally, but metaphorically, our phones are ringing with people who want to know more. They want to do demos. They want to see if it's a good fit for their brand because they've heard of us. They've seen people they know, like, and trust talking about Agorapulse. Juan asks, which is more powerful and effective marketing strategy, affiliate marketing or influencer marketing, and how? Yeah, and there's some similarities there for sure, but they're also very different. As I mentioned, we did do affiliate marketing, and our affiliate marketing program at the time was just wide open. Anybody could sign up, and it got abused. We saw a lot of people who used it to refer one person, either like their own company or somebody they knew, and then they're just earning lifetime recurring commissions on that one referral, which is not the point. What was the point for us was to try to create relationships with people who are talking about social media marketing, and it would make sense to talk about Agorapulse in their content, whether it's blog, video, or podcast content, didn't really matter to us. But we wanted them talking about it. And of course, we wanted to reward them for any opportunity to talk about Agorapulse and refer people. So now we've got a partner program that richly is affiliate marketing. And for me, it's the stepping stone to influencer marketing. I can see when people are really doing well and excelling at our partner program. Obviously, there's the core metrics of how many how much traffic did they send, how much of that traffic converted into trials, and how many of those trials converted into subscribers. But as we're opening up lines of communication between myself and Agorapulse and these new partners, we're getting questions. We're getting asked, hey, can we do this? Can we work on this together? Could you build us some assets? And so even if someone's numbers aren't as high as others, we can see the desire there, and that's something we can work with and leverage. So there's actually a lot of similarities between affiliate marketing and influencer marketing, but hopefully I helped you understand what the differences are. Someone asks, when is the influencer marketing bubble going to burst? I would say never. And I would say never because we're human beings, and we are always going to trust what someone we know, like, and trust has to say versus an ad. So I hear where you're coming from. There's this industry of influencer marketing. Yeah, that's got some questionable characters and some questionable practices. You're going to see more and more government oversight of the influencer marketing industry. But as a technique, as a reality of the human condition, yeah, we're always going to want to listen to the advice of the people we know, like, and trust, whether it's someone we actually know personally or someone we've gotten to know and we follow them. And take a couple more. If we've got time, Rachel, let me know if we need to stop. I know we're a couple minutes over now at this point, but I've got time if everybody else does. Someone asked, can brand promotion and influencer marketing work for short-term marketing campaigns as well as where you get limited time and scope to perform? Yeah, absolutely. Now, the one thing I would say here is try to develop the long-term relationship, even if the influencer marketing campaign itself is short-term. I mentioned Mari Smith earlier. If you don't know Mari Smith, she's what we would refer to as the queen of Facebook. She knows everything there is to know about Facebook. She is the preeminent influencer, marketer, expert on Facebook. She works with Facebook. She is amazing. And I love that we have had opportunities to work directly with Mari in the past, and we will in the future. But the key with Mari is I've been friends with Mari for years. And she would back you up. If you ask her, hey, do you know Mike Allton? She would hopefully say something very nice and complimentary about me because we've had that relationship for a long time, predating my time at Agorapulse, which is over 2 years now, 2.5 years. So the relationship is what's important. And if you maintain and build those relationships, then you can jump in with specific influencers whenever you want and say, hey, do you have time this quarter? Because I would love to have you come in and work with us on a co-marketing campaign. Mark asks, how do you distribute the budget in campaigns that gives the better ROI? Ooh, this is a great question, Mark. I focus on creating content that we know is going to be evergreen, and content and campaigns that we know will be able to insert links or some other mechanism can track. So here's a good contrast for you. Rather than Instagram campaigns that don't have any link at all, right? If you, to this day, if you post an image to your Instagram feed, not a story, but an image, there's no direct link, right? If you want somebody to go someplace and do something as a result of posting that image, you have to say, go click the link in my bio. And this is a very convoluted process that people have to go through. It's mobile first, so it's not friendly to driving a lot of traffic. Now, the argument can be made that if somebody goes through all those steps, they're going to be highly engaged and they might convert at a higher rate, but it's still going to be a much lower value. Contrast that with creating a piece of blog content, maybe a review, maybe it's a how-to that just very naturally and organically and authentically leads into using your brand, whatever it is that your brand does, that can have obvious tracking links built in. So you would see all the traffic that comes to that piece of content, all the traffic that's referred to your sales page or landing page, and all the people that convert on that page. That's so much easier to track. That's where I would lead, particularly if this is a part of your overall marketing strategy that you're kind of new to, or maybe you're struggling to get budget for, maybe you're struggling to show the ROI. Yeah, lean in on those kinds of campaigns. Cool. Rachel says we have more time. Awesome. I'll keep going. Someone asked which tools to use for influencer marketing. Yeah, so I mentioned Nimble quite a bit. I like that for tracking the individual influencers. Nimble is meant for sales teams, so you might get other benefits too for it with your team. It's referred to as a CRM or customer resource management. I like it for that purpose. We mentioned BuzzSumo for discovering who the influencers are in your niche. BuzzSumo is really ideal for Twitter and for content marketing. There was another one I mentioned in there. I think it's keywordtool.io. I always mess up the name because I don't use it every day. That's another one for measuring specifically Instagram and YouTube. Now, one thing I didn't mention too much, I could have, was how I use Agorapulse, because with Agorapulse, I'm constantly listening to when other people talk about me on their channels, or they talk about my content on their channels, but they don't actually mention me. So there's a big influencer in my space. His name is Michael Hyatt. He's written the book called Platform. He's a brilliant man. He's just fantastic at writing newsletters and helping people get organized and create content. A few years ago, he tweeted a link to a blog post that I had just published like hours earlier. And he didn't mention me. He just shared the blog post, which was wonderful. And thankfully, I was using Agorapulse at the time. I was able to see that he shared a link to my content and thank him for that. That's that layer or that echelon of influencer marketing and relationship building that a tool like Agorapulse can help you with. Someone asked how to find influencers on LinkedIn. Oh, that's a good question. That's hard. LinkedIn doesn't have a very open API. Now, API, that's the programming layer of a particular platform that allows other tools and other platforms to talk to it, right? Like Agorapulse, we rely on the APIs of every other social network in order to actually get into them. LinkedIn's kind of bad. It's not very open, which means it's really hard for tools to use. There's very minimal activity that tools can actually see. So what you're going to have to do and rely on a couple of things, internal searches on LinkedIn. You can also rely on your own network or the networks of other people that you connect with. Obviously, LinkedIn is very good at that. If you connect with me, you'll see all the people I'm connected with. LinkedIn will even suggest some people that you might want to connect with as a result of that connection with me. You can look at somebody's profile and you can see in the sidebar other people that other LinkedIn users have looked at after they looked at me, right? Like if you looked at my profile and then you see in my sidebar, you'll see, Jen Herman, Stephanie Little, Amanda Robinson, my co-authors, because it's often the case today that when people are looking at my profile, they go on to look at their profiles as well. So I would use that to kind of springboard your search, right? When you find somebody that's an influencer on LinkedIn for your industry, look to see who they're connected with and kind of grow your network that way. And let's see, someone asked, how can we precisely find targeted audience being an IT influencer? Oh, okay. So I would start with the major publications in IT, like Macworld and PC World, and there's, I'm sure, many other blogs and publications out there that are talking about the IT space, and see who's writing, who's being talked about, start with them. You can also look at other brands, and see who is repping them, who's targeting, who's being their ambassador. Adobe does a really cool job of showing off who their Spark ambassadors are. Now, I don't recommend poaching other brands' ambassadors and influencers if there's a one-to-one relationship. In other words, if you're Wave.video, don't go after Adobe Spark's ambassadors. That's bad form. And you will totally get a bad rep in the industry for doing that. But if you can find another brand in your industry that isn't a direct competitor and see who's talking about their brand, they're probably going to be a good fit for you. And those will probably be people that would be open to more brand relationships. Nigel says, thanks for the brilliant session, Mike. You're welcome. Do you believe startups across the globe can better benefit with a structured influencer outreach programs than with outright marketing, promotions, advertising? Absolutely. One of the really cool things, Nigel, that brands can do when they have a structured ambassador program is actually leverage their brand relationships, their ambassador relationships for advertising and promotion. Here's an example. If you partner with someone who has a Facebook page and they have a decent sized audience on Facebook and they have a website that's getting a decent amount of traffic, and by decent, I'm using that word specifically because decent is relevant, right? I mean, decent for you might be different from decent for me, but whatever that looks like for you, if you find an influencer like that, they'll have a Facebook pixel installed on their website. That Facebook pixel is allowing Facebook to recognize all the Facebook users that are coming to their website. And that is something that can be used to create ads so that you could advertise to Facebook users who had been to that ambassador's website. You can even use assets from that ambassador. This is something we've done very successfully at Agorapulse. We worked with a bunch of influencers a couple of years ago. We were all at the same conference in San Diego, Social Media Marketing World. And before the conference even started, we were sitting down with a professional videography team to film beautiful, professional looking interviews and basically reviews of these influencers about Agorapulse. Who are you? I'm Jessica Phillips. What do you do? Well, I run a marketing agency in Lima, Ohio. Oh, how do you use Agorapulse? Well, we use it to manage all of our client campaigns. We listen to all their channels. We schedule their content. This is what she said, paraphrasing, of course. But then, now that we've got that video asset, we can take quotes from it, snippets of the video, whatever we want to do, and we can push it out as an ad on Facebook to people who've already been to Jessica's site. They already know who Jessica is. And so they're scrolling through their Facebook feed like people do, and they see a video with Jessica's, beautiful smiling face in their feed, and they stop. Oh, what's Jessica talking about? I know her. We just talked to her last week. Oh, she's teaching me about Agorapulse. That's super interesting. These are the kinds of things that you could do. I mean, this is just one example. We don't have time to go into all the different ways that you can leverage influencers to build outreach programs and take more advantage of promotions and advertising, way more than just basic advertising can do. But that's what I would suggest. And then one last question. Oh, a couple of questions. One last question from Nigel. Do you believe it's better to have one major influencer for a campaign or several macro influencers? Does the decision depend on the product or service you're promoting, or just purely down to overall marketing strategy? Yeah, this is definitely going to be a combination of strategy and available budget, quite frankly. I like having, I refer to them as a stable. I like having a stable of influencers. One influencer is great, but they have a finite audience, right? Mari Smith has a large audience, but that's it. That's her audience. When I'm talking with Mari and Kelly and Stephanie and Jen and Steve and Ian and Andrew and Pete, all these different influencers, they hit a wide swath of different people at different stages of the game, different audiences at different times in different mediums, right? So now I've got podcasters and bloggers and videographers and live streamers. They're all talking about Agorapulse from different angles. That's the preferred method for me. Even if that means not having enough budget to go after somebody, truly at the mega level, like in our industry, in the social media industry, that may be like a Gary Vaynerchuk. I don't know that I'll ever set aside or ask for enough budget to work with someone like Gary V. He's remarkable. He's a pillar and a giant in the industry, and he costs top dollar. I'd much rather have 50, which is what I have. I'd much rather have 50 influencers that I'm talking to on a regular basis. And one last question, and then we'll wrap it up. From an insider's view that I have, how is the world of influencer marketing changing, specifically in the short term, considering the pandemic? Oh, this is a great question. So this is varying from industry to industry, and it's something I've definitely been paying attention to. Influencers who are specific to industries that have been impacted by the pandemic obviously have been hurting, and they've been having to pivot as much as that industry. Travel is an easy example, right? The travel industry has been crushed this year, and sadly, travel influencers have been just as crushed. They've been having to pivot. They've been having to repurpose old content, talk about their previous travels way more than they ever would have. Most travel influencers would be focusing on what they're doing right now or have done recently, rather than drawing on travel and experience in conversations they had years ago. But I'm also seeing on a much larger scale conversations about the influencer marketing industry overall. We're seeing work being developed towards standards, work being developed towards government oversight, which means we're moving in a direction where it'll be easier, it'll be safer for businesses to work with influencers. We're also seeing more widespread understanding of what real influencer marketing looks like, the kind of things we're talking about today. Like I said, I don't really consider paying somebody for a single tweet to be influencer marketing. That's sponsoring. I sponsored that tweet. I paid for that tweet ad, and that's it. That's not really exerting influence. It's not much more than a banner ad on a website. Whereas instead of a banner ad, if I can work with an influencer to create a piece of content that actually educates and informs, that's so much more powerful. I'll give you a quick example, and then we'll leave you with that. I could pay for banner advertising on a site, but instead of doing that, I worked with Ian Anderson Gray to create a piece of content. Ian Anderson Gray is famous for creating wonderful blog content and doing wonderful podcasting and live streams. He's based in the UK. But what Ian did a few years ago that really kind of put his flag in the ground was he wrote an article, 7 Reasons Not to Use Hootsuite. The Hootsuite, you've probably heard of. They're the #1 social media marketing tool in the space in terms of users and revenue and so on. So they're our direct competition. But Ian uses Agorapulse. Ian's a personal friend of mine. He loves Agorapulse. He'd be using Agorapulse even if we didn't pay him to use Agorapulse. So what we did was we looked at the content that he'd been creating, and I worked with Ian. You're going to laugh. I worked with Ian to create. He wrote, at my behest, 7 reasons not to use Agorapulse. You're like, what? Why would you pay someone to write why not to use your tool? Well, for one, it was 100% factual. We worked with Ian to identify 7 real reasons why you wouldn't want to use our tool. And it gave visibility to Agorapulse. And it also helped weed out people what it wouldn't be a good fit. Like if you're using Pinterest and Pinterest is your jam, Pinterest is where you want to spend all your time and that's where you're driving traffic for your business. We don't support Pinterest. So it saddens me to say we're just not a good fit for you. If you're like super mega enterprise and you want a whole team of people at your social platform of choice that's supporting your brand, that's not us. We don't have teams of people that we assign to brands. And there were some other reasons in there, but it was a great piece of content. It actually helps drive conversations and it helps drive the kinds of conversions that we want. That's the kind of lasting campaign that I want you to do with influencers in your niche. Identify them, figure out who they are, build that relationship, and create that kind of evergreen content. So I hope that's been helpful to you. I'm going to put my other screen back real quick because that has my information. I'm at Blogging Brute everywhere. You can find me there, bloggingbrute.com. You can follow me, and if you want to direct message me any other follow-up questions, I'm happy to answer that.
Thank you so much, Mike, for such a wonderful and such an insightful session. I'm very sure participants have enjoyed your session. I, for one, have learned a lot of things from you. Thank you so much for, joining us for this webinar.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. See you sometime again.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.